The dust from the overturned wagon hung in the air like a shroud when Wilton Kellerman first saw her kneeling in the dirt, her fingers desperately gathering spools of thread that scattered across the Arizona road like fallen stars. It was late spring of 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the trail between Phoenix and the small settlement of Willits, Arizona Territory. Wilton had been riding fence lines for the past 3 weeks, checking cattle boundaries for the Henderson Ranch, when he heard the crash that split the afternoon silence. His horse, a steady roan mare named Sadie, responded to his urgent heels and carried him around the bend where he found the overturned wagon, its contents spilled across the hardpan earth. The woman wore a simple gray dress covered by a leather apron, and her dark auburn hair had come loose from its pins, falling around her shoulders as she scrambled to collect her scattered belongings. An older woman, clearly injured, lay against a rock near the wreckage, pressing a cloth to her forehead. "Madam, are you hurt?" Wilton dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground with purpose as he approached. The younger woman looked up, and Wilton felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were the color of sage in morning light, green and gray mixed together, and they held both fear and determination. She could not have been more than 20 years old, perhaps a year or two younger than his own 23 years. "My teacher, Miss Harriet," she struck her head when the wheel gave way. "I need to get her to town, to a doctor." Her voice carried an Eastern accent, refined but not pretentious. Wilton moved immediately to the older woman, assessing her injury with the practiced eye of someone who had seen his share of ranch accidents. The cut on her forehead bled freely, but her eyes were clear and focused. "Can you ride, madam?" he asked Miss Harriet directly. "I believe so, young man, though I am afraid I feel quite dizzy." "Katherine, help me get her up," Wilton said to the younger woman, then caught himself. "I apologize, I assumed your name." "You assumed correctly, though I do not know how." The young woman moved to support Miss Harriet from the other side. "Katherine Osborne. We are weavers, traveling from Santa Fe to establish a shop in Willits. Wilton Kellerman. I work cattle for the Henderson Ranch just outside Willits." He lifted Miss Harriet carefully, mindful of her injury. "My guess on your name was just luck, though you look like a Katherine somehow." They managed to get Miss Harriet situated on Sadie, and Wilton walked alongside, leading the mare while Katherine gathered what she could salvage from the wagon. She worked with quick efficiency, prioritizing a large wooden loom that had miraculously survived the crash, several bags of dyed thread and yarn, and a leather satchel that seemed to contain patterns and papers. "The wagon cannot be saved today," Wilton said, examining the broken axle and splintered wheel. "But your goods, we can come back for them with a proper wagon. For now, we need to get Miss Harriet to Doc Brennan." Katherine nodded, her face tight with worry as she looked at her teacher. "She is all I have. My parents died of influenza 2 years ago in Boston. Miss Harriet took me as her apprentice when I had nowhere else to go. We have been traveling west, taking commissions and building our reputation." "She'll be all right," Wilton said with more confidence than he felt. "Head injuries were unpredictable things, but we need to move." The walk to Willits took 2 hours, and during that time, Wilton learned more about Katherine Osborne than he had learned about most people in years. She talked to keep herself calm, he realized, her words spilling out as she walked beside him in the growing heat. She told him about learning to weave as a child, watching her grandmother work a small loom in their Boston townhouse. She described the patterns she could create, the way threads came together to form images and textures that seemed almost alive. She spoke of Miss Harriet's kindness, how the older woman had seen potential in a grief-stricken girl and had given her not just a trade, but a purpose. I can see things in the patterns, Katherine said at one point, then laughed self-consciously. That sounds foolish, I know, but when I weave, sometimes I can see what the threads want to become. Not just a blanket or a wall hanging, but something more. A story, maybe, or a future. Does not sound foolish to me, Wilton replied. I know men who can read weather in the way grass bends, women who can tell you about a person by the way they handle a horse. We all see things others might miss. Katherine looked at him then with open curiosity. What do you see, Mr. Kellerman? Wilton, please. Mr. Kellerman was my father, and he has been gone 5 years now. He considered her question as they walked. I see patterns too, I suppose. In cattle movement, in the way land lies. I can tell you where water will run before the rain falls, where cattle will drift in a storm. My father taught me to read the land like some men read books. You miss him, Katherine said softly. It was not a question. Every day. He died in a stampede, saving 3 other men. They told me he just rode straight into danger like it was nothing, turned that whole herd away from the canyon edge. Wilton rarely spoke of his father's death, but something about Katherine invited confidence. Left me the ranch, but I could not keep it. Too much debt, too much land for one man. Sold it to Henderson, stayed on as a hand. They fell into comfortable silence after that, and Wilton found himself studying Katherine from the corner of his eye. She moved with grace despite her obvious exhaustion, and her hands, when she gestured, showed the calluses and strength of someone who worked with purpose. She was beautiful, certainly, but it was more than that. There was something about her that felt like coming home after a long ride. Willits appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent toward evening. The town consisted of one main street with perhaps 24 buildings, including a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, and Doc Brennan's office at the far end near the livery stable. It was a young town, only 5 years old, built to service the ranches that had sprung up in the valley. Doc Brennan, a portly man in his 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, took charge of Miss Harriet immediately. He ushered them into his office, a clean, well-lit space that smelled of carbolic and lavender, and began his examination while Katherine hovered anxiously nearby. Concussion, certainly, Doc Brennan announced after several minutes, but I have seen far worse. Miss Harriet is made of stern stuff. She will need rest, several days at least, and someone to watch her through the nights. Head injuries can be tricky things. I will watch her, Katherine said immediately. You will fall over yourself if you do not rest first, Doc Brennan replied firmly. When did you last eat, young lady? Katherine opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly trying to remember. Thought as much. Wilton, take Miss Osborne to the hotel, make sure Pearl gets her fed. I will sit with Miss Harriet tonight, and Katherine can take over the watching tomorrow after she has slept. Wilton expected Katherine to argue, but she simply deflated slightly, her shoulders sagging. You will send for me if she worsens. Immediately, Doc Brennan promised. The hotel was run by Pearl Mackenzie, a formidable woman in her 40s who had come west after her husband died in the war. She took one look at Katherine and began issuing orders like a general commanding troops. Bath first, then food, then bed, Pearl declared. You look like you have been dragged behind a wagon, dear girl. Wilton, you tell Henderson that Miss Osborne will be staying here until her teacher is well, and the bill can wait until she is settled. Yes, madam, Wilton said, hiding a smile. Nobody argued with Pearl. And you, Pearl turned to him, you look like you could use a meal yourself. I will have Consuela bring up 2 plates. You can eat in the dining room while Miss Osborne bathes. An hour later, Wilton sat across from Katherine at a small table in the hotel's dining room. She had changed into a blue dress that must have been in the satchel she saved, and her hair was properly pinned again, though small damp tendrils curled around her face. She looked exhausted but no longer quite so desperate. "I cannot thank you enough," Katherine said, working her way through a plate of beef stew and cornbread. "If you had not come along when you did." "Someone would have," Wilton said, though he was privately glad it had been him. "The trail sees enough traffic." "Still, you did not have to help as much as you have. You spent your entire afternoon on strangers." Wilton shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It was the right thing to do. Tomorrow I will take a wagon out to collect your goods from the crash site. Should be safe enough overnight. Nobody travels that stretch after dark, and there are no settlements between here and Phoenix to speak of." "I will come with you," Katherine said. "You should stay with Miss Harriet. Doc Brennan said she needs rest more than anything." "I will sit with her in the morning, but in the afternoon I want to help recover our belongings. That loom is our livelihood, Mr. Kellerman." "Wilton," she corrected herself at his raised eyebrow. "I need to see it safely retrieved." He could not argue with her logic, and truthfully, he found himself looking forward to more time in her company. There was something about Katherine that made him want to know everything, every thought in her head, every dream she carried. "All right, then. I will come by after lunch tomorrow." Katherine smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes and seemed to light the dim dining room. "I look forward to it." That night, lying in his small room at the bunkhouse on Henderson's ranch, Wilton found sleep elusive. He kept seeing Katherine's face, the way her eyes had held both vulnerability and strength. He thought about what she had said about seeing futures in her threads, about patterns and possibilities. He wondered what she would see if she wove something for him. The next day moved with frustrating slowness. Wilton completed his morning tasks with half his attention, earning curious looks from the other hands. Finally, after a quick lunch of salt pork and beans, he hitched a team to the ranch's supply wagon and headed into town. Katherine was waiting on the hotel's porch, dressed in the same practical gray dress and leather apron she had worn yesterday. Her face brightened when she saw him, and Wilton felt that strange shift in his chest again, like something clicking into place. "Miss Harriet is sleeping peacefully," Katherine reported as she climbed up to the wagon seat beside him. "Doc Brennan says she is improving already. He thinks another few days of rest and she will be well enough to begin moving around." "That is good news," Wilton said, guiding the team out of town. The afternoon sun was gentler than yesterday's brutal heat, and a breeze had picked up from the west, carrying the scent of creosote and sage. Katherine sat quietly for the first mile, then began to speak. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what we will do when Miss Harriet is well. We came to Willits because we heard the town was growing, that there might be opportunity for skilled crafters, but I do not know if that information was accurate. The town seems quite small." "It is growing," Wilton confirmed. "Slower than Phoenix, certainly, but steady. More ranches starting up every season, more families settling. There is no weaver here currently. Folks have to send to Phoenix or Santa Fe for anything beyond basic cloth." "That is encouraging." Katherine plucked at her apron absently. "We will need to find a space for a shop, somewhere we can set up the looms and take commissions. I have some money saved, but not much. This trip took most of our resources." "There is an empty building on Main Street," Wilton found himself saying. "Used to be a saddlery before the owner moved to California. Henderson owns it now, been sitting empty for near a year. I could speak to him if you like. He is a fair man, might be willing to rent it reasonable." Katherine turned to look at him fully, her expression somewhere between hope and disbelief. "You would do that? You barely know us." "I know enough," Wilton said simply. "Know you are skilled at your craft, know you take care of those you love, know you are determined to make a life here." That is enough for Henderson, and it is enough for me. They reached the crash site to find everything as they had left it. Working together, they carefully loaded the loom into the wagon, along with the scattered supplies and tools. Katherine worked with focused intensity, checking each item, sorting damaged goods from salvageable ones. The loom had indeed survived remarkably well, only a minor crack in one of the wooden pieces that Wilton assured her could be easily repaired. As they worked, Katherine began to talk about weaving, her hands moving expressively as she described different techniques and patterns. She told him about tapestry weaving, where images were built thread by thread, and about the mathematical precision required for certain designs. Her passion was evident in every word, and Wilton found himself fascinated not just by what she said, but by the way her whole being seemed to come alive when she spoke of her craft. "I have been working on something new," Katherine said as they secured the last of the supplies. "A technique for creating images that seem to have depth, almost like looking through a window. I combine different weaving styles, vary the tension and the thread weights. Miss Harriet says it is remarkable that she has never seen anything quite like it." "I would like to see your work sometime," Wilton said. Katherine met his eyes and something passed between them, a recognition that felt both new and ancient. "I would like to show you." The ride back to Willits passed too quickly for Wilton's liking. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation flowing with easy comfort. Katherine asked about his life on the ranch, and he found himself describing the daily rhythms of cattle work, the satisfaction of a job done well, the stark beauty of the Arizona landscape. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was truly hearing him. "You love this land," she observed. "I do. It is hard country, unforgiving in many ways, but there is something honest about it. It does not pretend to be anything other than what it is." "Like you," Katherine said softly, then looked away quickly, color rising in her cheeks. Wilton felt warmth spread through his chest. "I hope that is a compliment." "It is," Katherine said, still not quite meeting his eyes. "I have met many men who wear masks, who present one face while hiding another. You do not seem to do that." "Life is too short for pretending," Wilton said. "My father taught me that. He said a man should stand straight and speak true and let the chips fall where they will." "Your father sounds like he was a good man. The best I knew." They unloaded Katherine's belongings at the hotel, with Pearl directing where everything should be stored. The loom they set up in a large, unused room on the ground floor, and Katherine's face lit with relief to see it safely housed. "I will speak to Henderson tomorrow about the building," Wilton promised as he prepared to head back to the ranch. "Wilton," Katherine caught his arm gently, "thank you for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I truly mean it. You have been a blessing to us." Her hand on his arm felt like it belonged there, and Wilton found himself reluctant to move away. "Happy to help, Katherine. I will see you tomorrow." That evening, Wilton approached James Henderson after supper. Henderson was a tall, lean man in his 50s with gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that missed very little. He had built his ranch from nothing, surviving Apache raids, droughts, and cattle plagues through sheer determination and fair dealing. "Boss, I wanted to talk to you about that empty building in town," Wilton began. Henderson looked up from the ledger he was reviewing. "The old saddlery. You know someone interested?" Wilton explained about Katherine and Miss Harriet, the accident, their plans for a weaving business. Henderson listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. "You sweet on this girl?" Henderson asked when Wilton finished. The direct question caught Wilton off guard. "I barely know her, sir. That was not what I asked." Wilton considered lying, then remembered his father's teachings about speaking truth. "I could be." She is different from anyone I have met. Henderson nodded slowly. Your judgment has always been sound, Wilton. If you think these women would be good for the town, I trust that. Tell Miss Osborne she can have the building for $20 a month. First month free while they get established. I will have the papers drawn up. That is generous, sir. That is business. Town needs more than saloons and supply stores. Skilled crafters bring in a better class of settler, make the place feel more like a real town and less like a temporary camp. Henderson returned to his ledger, then looked up again. You have been a good hand, Wilton, one of my best, but you are made for more than riding fence lines. I have been thinking about offering you a foreman position, but maybe you have other plans forming. I am not sure what you mean. I mean that look in your eye when you talk about this girl. I have seen it before, including in my own mirror 40 years ago when I met my Mary. Just saying, if you decide to make changes, we will talk about what comes next. Wilton rode back to town that evening, unable to wait until morning to tell Katherine the news. He found her in Miss Harriet's room at Doc Brennan's office, sitting beside the bed and reading aloud from a book of poetry. Miss Harriet was awake, looking much improved, and both women smiled when Wilton knocked softly on the doorframe. I have good news, he announced, and proceeded to tell them about Henderson's offer. Katherine's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. $20. That is beyond fair. That is incredibly generous. Henderson is a good man, Wilton said. And he is right that the town needs what you can offer. There are ranchers' wives who would pay handsomely for fine weavings, not to mention commissioned work for the hotel and the church. Oh, Katherine, Miss Harriet said, her voice still weak but filled with emotion, we can truly do this. We can build the shop we have been dreaming of. Katherine wiped her eyes, laughing through her tears. Yes, yes, we can. She stood and without apparent thought crossed the room to hug Wilton. He stood frozen for a moment, then carefully put his arms around her, acutely aware of her warmth, the faint scent of lavender in her hair, the way she fit perfectly against him. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder. I do not know how I will ever repay such kindness. No repayment needed, Wilton said, though his voice came out rougher than intended. Just be happy here. That is enough. Katherine pulled back enough to look up at him, and the expression in her eyes made Wilton's breath catch. He saw wonder there, and gratitude, but also something deeper, something that mirrored what he felt building in his own chest. Doc Brennan cleared his throat from the doorway, breaking the moment. Miss Harriet needs her rest, young people. Perhaps you could continue this conversation elsewhere. They sprang apart, Katherine blushing furiously while Wilton felt heat climb up his neck. Miss Harriet, he noticed, was trying very hard not to smile. Outside in the cooling evening air, Katherine and Wilton stood somewhat awkwardly on the porch of Doc Brennan's office. Crickets sang in the gathering dusk, and somewhere a dog barked. I am sorry if I was too forward, Katherine said quietly. I was just so happy, and you have been so kind, and You have nothing to apologize for, Wilton interrupted gently. I was happy to receive it. The hug, I mean. He felt foolish, like a boy trying to talk to a girl for the first time. Katherine looked at him, and a slow smile curved her lips. Good. Because I find myself wanting to hug you rather frequently, which is unusual for me. I am not typically an impulsive person. You bring out something in me too, Wilton admitted. Something I have not felt before. They stood looking at each other as the stars began to emerge overhead, and Wilton felt the weight of possibilities hanging in the air between them. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it more than he had wanted almost anything, but it seemed too soon, too presumptuous. I should let you rest, he finally said. Tomorrow we can look at the building, start planning how you want to set things up. I would like that, Katherine said. Wilton. I am glad you were the one who found us on that road. I think maybe it was meant to be." "I am starting to think the same thing," Wilton said softly. He walked her back to the hotel, their hands brushing occasionally as they moved through the darkness. Each touch felt electric, charged with potential. At the hotel steps they lingered, neither quite ready to part. "Good night, Katherine." "Good night, Wilton." The next week passed in a blur of activity. Miss Harriet continued to recover, gaining strength daily until Doc Brennan pronounced her well enough to leave his care. The old saddlery building was cleaned and prepared, with Wilton spending every spare hour helping to make it suitable for a weaving shop. Other townspeople pitched in too, curious about the newcomers and their unusual trade. Pearl from the hotel donated curtains for the windows. The owner of the general store, a gregarious man named Timothy Walsh, offered to stock Katherine's simpler woven goods alongside his regular merchandise. Even the saloon keeper, a grizzled former prospector named Dutch, showed up one afternoon with a beautifully carved wooden sign reading Osborne Weavings that he had made himself. "Figured you ladies need something to hang over the door," Dutch said gruffly, clearly embarrassed by his own generosity. "Paid a man in Phoenix to do the lettering proper." Katherine had been overwhelmed by the welcome, repeatedly telling Wilton that she had never experienced such kindness from strangers. Wilton tried to explain that frontier towns survived by taking care of their own, that people who chose to build lives in hard country understood the value of community. But he also suspected that Katherine's own genuine warmth and Miss Harriet's gracious manner had won hearts. They were easy to like, easy to want to help. As they worked together preparing the shop, Wilton found himself falling deeper under Katherine's spell. He learned that she sang quietly while she worked, old folk songs from her childhood. He discovered that she had a quick wit and was not afraid to tease him when he took himself too seriously. He watched her hands as she worked, admiring the skill and confidence in every movement. For her part, Katherine seemed equally drawn to him. She would find excuses to stand close while they worked, would touch his arm when making a point, would watch him with an expression that made Wilton's heart race. The attraction between them was palpable, and half the town seemed to be watching their courtship with amused interest. "That young man is smitten," Pearl told Katherine one evening over dinner, her voice pitched to carry across the dining room where Wilton sat with some other ranch hands. "And you are no better, dear girl. I have seen calves with subtler feelings." Katherine had turned scarlet while the other diners laughed good-naturedly. Wilton had caught her eye across the room and winked, which only made her blush deepen. But she had smiled too, that beautiful smile that made everything else fade away. 10 days after the accident, Osborne Weavings officially opened for business. The shop looked beautiful, with the larger loom set up in the main room where customers could watch Katherine work, and Miss Harriet's smaller loom in a back room where she could create pieces away from public view. Samples of their work hung on the walls, intricate tapestries showing everything from simple geometric patterns to complex scenes of landscapes and animals. But the piece that drew the most attention was a new work that Katherine had created during the previous week. It hung in the shop's front window, and people stopped on the street to stare at it. The weaving showed a cowboy on horseback, silhouetted against a rising sun, riding toward a distant horizon. But what made it remarkable was the depth Katherine had achieved, the way the image seemed three-dimensional, as if you could reach into it and touch the horse's mane or feel the warmth of that woven sun. "It is extraordinary," Miss Harriet told the gathered crowd during the opening. "Katherine has a gift beyond anything I could teach her. She sees things in the threads that others cannot, creates beauty that seems almost alive. Wilton stood toward the back of the crowd, studying the piece. There was something about the cowboy that felt familiar, something in the set of his shoulders or the way he sat his horse. When the crowd thinned, he approached Katherine. "That cowboy," he said quietly, "he looks like me, or maybe how I want to see myself." Katherine colored slightly but met his eyes. "I wove what I saw. You, riding toward your future. I wanted to capture that moment on the road when you came around the bend and found us. From my perspective, you looked just like that, backlit by the sun, coming to help when we needed it most." "You see me as heroic?" Wilton asked, touched beyond words. "I see you as good," Katherine corrected gently. "Brave and kind and true. The heroic part, that is just who you are." Wilton wanted to kiss her right there in front of everyone, but instead he took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Katherine, I know we have not known each other long, but I need you to know something. That day on the road when I saw you gathering your threads, I felt something shift inside me, like I had been waiting for you without knowing it." Katherine's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I felt it too, like recognition, like coming home." "Can I court you properly?" Wilton asked. "I know I am just a ranch hand and you deserve better, but I promise I will work hard to give you a good life. I have some money saved, and Henderson has talked about making me foreman, which would mean better pay." "I know it is not much," but Katherine put her fingers against his lips, stopping his nervous tumble of words. "You are not just a ranch hand, Wilton Kellerman. You are the finest man I have met, and yes, you can court me. I would like that very much." Wilton's face split into a grin. Around them, he was dimly aware of people clapping and cheering, but all he could see was Katherine's smile. Their courtship over the following months became the stuff of town legend. Wilton would ride in from the ranch every evening after his work was done, often covered in dust and smelling of cattle and horse, and Katherine would meet him with a clean shirt she had set aside for the purpose. They would walk together through the town's single street, talking about their days, making plans for their futures. On Sundays, Wilton would escort both Katherine and Miss Harriet to the small church, sitting in the back pew with Katherine's hand in his while the circuit preacher delivered his weekly sermon. Afterward, they would often join other young couples for picnics by the small creek that ran through the valley, and Wilton felt his world expanding to include not just cattle and land but laughter and music, and the joy of community. Katherine's business thrived. Word of her extraordinary weaving spread through the territory, and soon she was receiving commission requests from as far as Tucson, and even from California. She worked long hours, her fingers moving with practiced precision, creating beauty from colored threads. But she always made time for Wilton, always greeted him with genuine pleasure when he arrived each evening. Wilton, for his part, felt like he was living in a dream. Henderson had indeed made him foreman, which came with increased responsibilities and better wages. He threw himself into his work with renewed energy, driven by the desire to prove himself worthy of Katherine's regard. He began saving money in earnest, envisioning a future that grew clearer in his mind with each passing day. One warm evening in late summer, about 4 months after they had met, Wilton took Katherine to a hill overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the scattered clouds. They sat together on a blanket Katherine had woven, one showing a pattern of intertwined vines and flowers. "I have been thinking," Wilton began, nervous despite the months they had spent together, "about the future, about what I want and where I am heading." "And what do you want?" Katherine asked softly, leaning against his shoulder. "You," Wilton said simply. "A life with you. Children someday if you want them. A home we build together. I know it has not been long and some people would say we should wait longer, but Katherine, I have never been more certain of anything. I love you. I think I have loved you since that first moment when you looked up at me with those sage-colored eyes." Katherine turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "I love you too, Wilton. I have been waiting for you to say it first, afraid I was feeling too much too fast. But I know my heart. I knew it weeks ago. You are what I have been weaving toward my whole life, the pattern I did not know I was seeking." Wilton reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing fancy but bought with honest money and chosen with care. "Katherine Osborne, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy?" Katherine's answer was to kiss him, her lips soft and warm against his. It was their first real kiss, and Wilton felt the world narrow down to just the two of them, to the perfect rightness of holding her in his arms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing heavily, Katherine's eyes were bright with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." Wilton slipped the ring onto her finger, and they sat together watching the sun complete its descent, talking about their future with the easy comfort of two people who understood they had found something rare and precious. They married 6 weeks later in the small church, with most of the town in attendance. Miss Harriet cried happy tears throughout the ceremony, while Henderson stood as Wilton's best man, looking proud as any father. Katherine wore a dress she had made herself, simple white cotton that she had embroidered with delicate flowers, and she carried wildflowers that Pearl had gathered that morning. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wilton kissed Katherine with all the love and promise he felt, and the church erupted in cheers. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible for such a small town to produce. "You are good for each other," Henderson told Wilton during a quiet moment. "I can see it in how you have both bloomed these past months. You were always a good hand, but now you are becoming a leader. And Katherine, she has found a home here, a place to plant roots." "I want to build her a house," Wilton confessed. "Not right away. We will start in the rooms above the shop that Miss Harriet insists we take. But someday I want to give her a real home, a place that is ours." "And you will," Henderson said confidently. "You have the drive and the skill. Give it a few years, save your money, and you will have that home. Maybe even your own small ranch if that is what you want." As autumn turned the landscape gold and crimson, Wilton and Katherine settled into married life with the ease of two people perfectly suited to each other. They moved into the rooms above the weaving shop, a small but comfortable space that Katherine made beautiful with her weavings and Wilton's simple, well-crafted furniture. Miss Harriet took rooms at the hotel, claiming she wanted to give the newlyweds privacy, but visiting the shop daily to work on her own projects and help with the steady stream of customers. Wilton would wake before dawn to ride out to the ranch, spending his days managing the hands and overseeing the cattle operations. Henderson had not exaggerated about Wilton's leadership abilities. The other hands respected him, and the work flowed smoothly under his direction. But no matter how long or hard the day, Wilton always rode back to town in time to have dinner with Katherine, to hear about her day, to fall asleep with her in his arms. Katherine continued to create weavings that amazed everyone who saw them. Her reputation grew, and with it, their financial security. She could command premium prices for her work, especially the large tapestries that took weeks to complete but captured scenes and stories with breathtaking realism. She created a piece for the church showing the Nativity, another for the hotel depicting the Arizona landscape, and a third for Henderson showing a cattle drive that seemed so real you could almost hear the lowing of the steers. But her favorite pieces, she told Wilton, were the ones she made for him. She wove a blanket for their bed showing their wedding day, the small church and gathered friends rendered in intimate detail. She created a wall hanging showing Wilton on horseback, which he insisted on hanging in Henderson's ranch house parlor despite his protests that it was too fine for such a place. And she began a large tapestry that she worked on in stolen hours. A piece she said was for their future home, though she would not let him see it until it was finished. Winter came to Arizona with cold nights and occasional snow that dusted the high country. Wilton and Katherine spent long evenings by their small stove, talking and planning and simply being together. Katherine taught Wilton about weaving, showing him how different threads created different effects, explaining the mathematics of patterns. Wilton taught Katherine about ranch management and cattle, describing the rhythms of the seasons and the challenges of keeping livestock healthy and profitable. "I never thought I would care about cattle breeding," Katherine laughed one evening as Wilton explained bloodlines. "But the way you talk about it, it is almost like weaving, taking different elements and combining them to create something better." "That is exactly it," Wilton said, pleased she understood. "It is all patterns, like you said that first day. Life is patterns, whether we are talking about weaving or ranching or anything else." On a cold evening in February, Katherine told Wilton she was pregnant. He was mending tack at their small table when she came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice filled with barely contained excitement. Wilton put down his work and turned to face her. "What is it?" "We are going to have a baby." "I am certain. I have suspected for a few weeks, but now I am sure." Wilton felt joy explode in his chest like a firework. He stood and swept Katherine into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "A baby," he said wonderingly, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "Our baby." "Yes," Katherine said, her eyes shining. "Due in late summer, I think. August or early September." "I am going to be a father," Wilton said, the reality beginning to sink in. "We need to prepare. The rooms here are too small. We need more space, and Wilton," Katherine interrupted gently, "we have time. We will figure it all out. For now, just be happy with me." So Wilton let go of his immediate impulse to fix and plan, and instead simply held his wife, marveling at the miracle of the life they were creating together. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Katherine suffered from morning sickness for the first few months that left her pale and exhausted. Wilton fretted constantly, but Katherine bore it with good humor, continuing to work at her loom whenever she felt able. Miss Harriet took on more of the shop's daily operations, insisting that Katherine rest more, though Katherine proved stubbornly determined to maintain her usual pace as long as possible. As spring arrived and Katherine's belly began to swell with undeniable evidence of the coming child, Wilton approached Henderson about purchasing land. He had been saving diligently, and he had enough now for a small parcel on the edge of Henderson's property, a few acres with good water access and room to build. "I want to build Katherine a house before the baby comes," Wilton told his boss. "Something solid and permanent, a real home." Henderson agreed to sell him 5 acres at a fair price, and that very week, Wilton began working every spare moment on the house. Other ranch hands pitched in during their off hours, as did men from town, drawn by Katherine's kindness and Wilton's quiet integrity. What might have taken one man a year to build alone rose from the ground in a matter of months through community effort. It was a simple house, but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a main room with a large stone fireplace, and a separate room that could serve as Katherine's weaving studio. The walls were solid adobe, the roof tightly thatched and then shingled. Windows faced east to catch the morning light, and a covered porch ran the length of the front, perfect for sitting out on cool evenings. Katherine cried when Wilton first brought her to see the nearly completed house in early July. She walked through each room, her hands running over the smooth walls, taking in every detail. "It is perfect," she said finally, turning to face Wilton with tears streaming down her face. "It is everything I could have dreamed." "It is ours," Wilton said, pulling her close as much as her pregnant belly would allow. "The first thing that is truly ours, built with our own hands and the help of good people. We will make a life here, Katherine. A good life." They moved into the house 2 weeks before the baby was due, spending those final days preparing the small nursery and organizing their belongings in their new space. Katherine had finished the large tapestry she had been working on, and they hung it in the main room. It showed their house surrounded by flowering plants and trees, with figures that were clearly them standing on the porch. But in the weaving, there were also children playing in the yard, chickens pecking near a small garden, and horses in a corral Wilton had not yet built but planned to. "You wove our future," Wilton said, studying the piece with wonder. "I wove what I saw in the threads," Katherine corrected with a smile. "What the pattern showed me was possible." Their son was born on a sweltering evening in late August of 1879. Exactly 1 year after Katherine and Wilton had met on that dusty road. The labor was long and difficult, with Katherine suffering through hours of intense pain, while Wilton paced anxiously outside with Miss Harriet and Pearl. Doc Brennan had taken over one of the new bedrooms, turning it into a temporary birthing room, and his calm competence was the only thing that kept Wilton from losing his mind with worry. Finally, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange glory, Wilton heard the thin, outraged cry of his newborn son. Doc Brennan emerged from the bedroom, sweat-stained but smiling. "You have a healthy boy, and Katherine is tired but well. Give me a few minutes to finish up, then you can come in." When Wilton finally entered the room, he found Katherine propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat, and her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket that she had woven months ago. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small snuffling sounds as he rooted against Katherine's chest. "Meet your son," Katherine said softly. Wilton approached carefully, as if sudden movement might shatter the moment. He looked down at the tiny face, at the impossibly small fingers curled into fists, and felt love so intense it was almost painful. "He is perfect," Wilton whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Katherine. Thank you for this gift." They named him William Warren Kellerman, after both of their fathers, and called him Will from the start. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he fit into their lives with surprising ease. Katherine took to motherhood naturally, though she was exhausted those first few weeks as Will woke frequently to nurse. Wilton helped however he could, walking the floor with his son during fussy periods, changing diapers, and taking over all the household tasks to give Katherine time to rest and bond with the baby. Miss Harriet was a constant help, bringing meals and offering to watch, so Katherine could catch a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. Pearl organized a rotation of town women who stopped by with food and assistance, the same community that had helped build their house now supporting them through this new transition. As the weeks passed and Will grew from a tiny newborn into a baby with distinct personality, Wilton found himself marveling daily at his life. 2 years ago, he had been alone, a ranch hand with no particular prospects beyond steady work and simple survival. Now he had a wife he loved more than he could express, a son who was the light of his life, a home he had built with his own hands, and a future full of promise. Katherine returned to her weaving when Will was about 3 months old, setting up the loom in her studio where she could work while he napped. She created a sling that allowed her to carry Will against her chest while she worked on simple projects, and Wilton often came home to find them like that, Katherine weaving while their son dozed peacefully, both of them bathed in the golden afternoon light. The years that followed were full and rich. Will grew into a curious, energetic toddler who seemed to inherit the best qualities of both his parents. He had Katherine's eyes and her quick mind, but Wilton's steady temperament and love of the outdoors. By the time he was 2, he was accompanying Wilton on short rides around their property, sitting in front of his father on Sadie and squealing with delight at every bird or rabbit they spotted. Katherine's reputation as a weaver continued to grow. She received a commission from the territorial governor for a large tapestry depicting Arizona's landscape and history, a project that took her 6 months to complete, but resulted in a piece that was displayed in the Capitol building in Prescott. The payment for that single piece was enough for Wilton to buy another 20 acres and start a small herd of his own cattle, the beginning of what would eventually become Kellerman Ranch. Miss Harriet remained an integral part of their lives, though she was aging and her hands no longer had the dexterity for complex weaving. She spent her time instead teaching Katherine's techniques to other women, training a new generation of weavers, and ensuring that the craft would continue in Willits. She took particular delight in her role as Will's honorary grandmother, spoiling him shamelessly and filling his head with stories from her long life. When Will was 3, Katherine became pregnant again. This time she suffered less from morning sickness, but found the Arizona summer heat nearly unbearable in her later months. Their daughter was born in July of 1882, a tiny thing with a cap of auburn hair exactly the shade of Katherine's. They named her Sarah Ruth, after Katherine's mother, and she proved to have a temperament as fiery as her hair, keeping them all on their toes from the start. With 2 children and a growing ranch, Wilton found himself working harder than ever. Henderson had retired by this point, selling his ranch to a consortium, but recommending Wilton for the manager position. Wilton declined, preferring to focus on building his own operation, but the offer itself was a testament to how far he had come. The boy who had lost his father's ranch to debt had become a respected rancher and businessman in his own right. Katherine balanced motherhood and her craft with grace, though there were days when she felt pulled in too many directions. Wilton did his best to support her, taking the children out for long rides on Sunday afternoons so Katherine could work uninterrupted. They hired a young woman named Maria from a neighboring ranch to help with the housework and childcare, giving Katherine more time for weaving. As Will and Sarah grew, they often sat in Katherine's studio watching her work. She would explain what she was doing, teaching them about colors and patterns, about how individual threads came together to create something greater than themselves. Will showed some interest, but was always more drawn to the outdoors and the cattle. Sarah, however, seemed to inherit her mother's gift, her small hands surprisingly deft as she experimented with simple weavings on a child-sized loom Katherine made for her. Life was not without its challenges. There were years when drought threatened the ranch, when cattle prices dropped, when sickness swept through the valley. Miss Harriet passed away peacefully in her sleep when Will was 7, and they mourned her loss deeply. She was buried in Willits' small cemetery, her grave marked by a headstone that Katherine commissioned, engraved with a weaving pattern Miss Harriet had particularly loved. But through all the ups and downs, Wilton and Katherine's love remained steady and strong. They still took evening walks together when they could, sometimes alone and sometimes with their children trailing behind. They still talked for hours, sharing dreams and worries, making plans and solving problems together. The passion that had sparked on a dusty road all those years ago had deepened into something more profound, a partnership built on trust, respect, and genuine affection. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Katherine gave Wilton a gift that left him speechless. It was a tapestry showing that first day they met, the overturned wagon and scattered threads, Katherine kneeling in the dust and Wilton on horseback riding toward her, backlit by the sun. But unlike the earlier piece she had created, this one showed more context, more of the story. In the background, almost hidden in the weaving, were images of their future, their house and children woven into the landscape in a way that seemed both part of the scene and separate from it. "I wanted to capture the whole story," Katherine explained as Wilton studied the piece with tears in his eyes. "How that single moment contained everything that came after. All our happiness, all our love, it was there from the beginning, woven into those first threads." "You saw our future even then," Wilton said, remembering her words from that first day about seeing things in the patterns. "I saw possibility," Katherine corrected gently. "The future we built together, that was our doing, our choices, our love. But yes, I saw that we could be something remarkable together." Wilton pulled her close, kissing her with all the love and gratitude he felt. "We are remarkable together. Every day with you is a gift, Katherine. Every single day." As the 1880s progressed, Willits grew from a small settlement into a proper town. More families arrived, drawn by the success of ranches like Wilton's and the reputation of crafters like Katherine. A school was built, and Will and Sarah attended regularly, both proving to be bright students. A larger church replaced the small original building, and Katherine wove a new tapestry for it, this one showing the Good Shepherd that became famous throughout the territory. The ranch continued to expand as Wilton carefully reinvested profits into land and cattle. He developed a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock, and buyers came from as far as California to purchase his steers. He hired several hands to help with the work, treating them with the same respect Henderson had shown him years ago, and in return earning their loyalty and hard work. Katherine began teaching weaving more formally, taking on apprentices much as Miss Harriet had once taken her on. Several young women from Willits and surrounding ranches studied with her, learning not just the technical skills, but the artistic vision that made Katherine's work so distinctive. She insisted on teaching them to see the patterns and possibilities in the threads, to weave not just with their hands but with their hearts. When Will was 12, he began working seriously on the ranch, learning cattle handling and ranch management from his father. He showed a natural aptitude for the work, and Wilton felt pride seeing his son develop skills and confidence. Sarah, now 9, spent most of her time at her mother's loom, creating weavings that already showed remarkable sophistication. Katherine told Wilton that Sarah might actually surpass her in skill someday, that she had never seen such natural talent in one so young. "We have been blessed," Wilton said one evening as he and Katherine sat on their porch watching the sun set. The children were inside doing schoolwork, and for a moment they had rare quiet, more than I ever imagined possible. "We have built a good life," Katherine agreed, taking his hand. "I think about that girl on the road sometimes, gathering her scattered threads with no idea what was coming. If I could go back and tell her that everything would work out better than she dared dream, I wonder if she would believe me." "Would you change anything?" Wilton asked. "If you could go back, would you do anything differently?" Katherine thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Not a single thing. Every moment, even the hard ones, brought us here. I would not risk losing any of it." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the sky turn from orange to pink to deep purple as stars began to emerge. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Closer by, they could hear Will patiently helping Sarah with her arithmetic. Inside their home, built by love and community, the life they had woven together continued its steady pattern. 2 more children joined their family over the next several years. James was born when Will was 13, a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved books almost as much as his mother loved weaving. And finally, when Katherine was 39 and Wilton 42, twin girls arrived, Ellen and Margaret, completing their family with laughter and chaos. The ranch house was expanded to accommodate their growing family. New rooms added with the same care as the original structure. Katherine's weaving studio was moved to a separate building where she could work without constant interruptions, though she never minded when the children came to watch or help. The property now included the corral Wilton had dreamed of, a large garden that provided much of their food, chicken coops, and even a small orchard that was beginning to bear fruit. Will took on more responsibility as he grew into young manhood, eventually becoming his father's full partner in running the ranch. At 19, he married Lucy, a rancher's daughter from near Phoenix, and Wilton helped them build a house on the far side of the property. Sarah continued to weave, opening her own shop in Willits when she turned 18 and quickly establishing her own reputation for beautiful work that complemented, but was distinct from her mother's style. As Wilton entered his late 40s and Katherine her mid-40s, they found themselves becoming grandparents. Will and Lucy's first child, a boy they named after Wilton, arrived in the spring of 1894. Sarah married a lawyer who had recently moved to Willits, and they settled into a house near her shop. James showed an aptitude for business and began handling much of the ranch's financial operations, his careful record-keeping and shrewd investments helping the ranch continue to prosper. The twin girls, Ellen and Margaret, proved to be a handful as they grew, constantly getting into mischief but bringing joy and energy to the household. They were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and seeming to communicate without words. Both showed interest in weaving, but also in cattle work, refusing to be limited by expectations of what girls should or should not do. Through it all, Wilton and Katherine remained each other's center. Their love had evolved over the decades from that first sharp attraction into something deeper and more sustaining. They knew each other completely, could anticipate each other's needs and thoughts, and still found joy in each other's company after all these years. "Do you remember," Katherine said one evening as they celebrated their 25th anniversary, "what you said to me that first day, that you saw patterns in cattle movement and land?" "I remember," Wilton said, looking around at the gathered family at the life they had built. "I have spent 25 years seeing patterns in you, learning to read your moods and thoughts like I read the weather." "And what do you see now?" Katherine asked, her eyes warm with love. "I see my future," Wilton said simply. "Same as I saw that day when I looked at your weaving of the cowboy riding toward the horizon. You put me in that image, riding toward possibility. But the truth is, Katherine, you were the horizon I was riding toward all along. You were the future I did not know I was seeking." Katherine's eyes filled with tears and she kissed him softly. "We found each other. Against all odds, on a dusty road in the middle of nowhere, we found each other, and we built this." She gestured at their family, at the home filled with love and laughter. "Everything I ever wove, every pattern I ever created, was practice for weaving this life with you." As the celebration continued around them, with children and grandchildren filling the house with noise and joy, Wilton pulled Katherine close. He thought about that day on the road, about the girl gathering scattered threads, about how a simple act of kindness had led to everything he held dear. The pattern of their life together had been woven thread by thread, moment by moment, choice by choice, and it was the most beautiful creation he could imagine. Years continued to pass, bringing both joy and inevitable sorrow. Wilton's mother, who had moved to Willits to be near them in her later years, passed away peacefully at 83. Some years were harder than others, droughts or economic downturns challenging the ranch, but the foundation Wilton and Katherine had built remained strong. The family pulled together in hard times and celebrated together in good times, the bonds between them deep and resilient. As Wilton approached 60, he began stepping back from the day-to-day ranch operations, trusting Will and James to manage things while he took on more of an advisory role. He found himself with more time to spend with Katherine, to take those long rides they had enjoyed as newlyweds, though now at a more sedate pace. They would ride out to their favorite spots, places that held memories from throughout their decades together, and simply be still, enjoying the land and each other's presence. Katherine, now in her late 50s, still wove regularly, though her pace had slowed. Her hands occasionally ached from arthritis, but she refused to stop creating. She was training several young weavers, passing on her techniques and her philosophy about seeing patterns and possibilities. Her reputation had spread far beyond Arizona, and museums in San Francisco and even New York displayed her work. But her favorite pieces remained the personal ones, the weavings that told the story of her family. She created a massive tapestry showing the entire Kellerman clan, including all the children and grandchildren, gathered at the ranch. It took her 3 years to complete, working on it in small increments, but when finished it was breathtaking, each face rendered with loving detail, each figure perfectly captured. The grandchildren multiplied as Will and Lucy had 4 children total. Sarah and her husband had 3, and even young James married and started a family. The ranch house regularly overflowed with children during holidays and special occasions, and Wilton and Katherine delighted in their roles as grandparents, spoiling the little ones shamelessly and filling their heads with stories. "We are leaving a legacy," Katherine said one evening as they sat on their porch, now weathered by decades but still solid. They were in their early 60s, both showing the marks of age but still healthy and active. Not just the ranch or my weavings, but something more. Values, traditions, stories, the things that matter. "We are leaving love," Wilton said simply. "We showed our children what love looks like, how it endures and grows and sustains. They are passing that on to their children. That is the real legacy." Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I could not have done any of this without you. You were the thread that held everything together, Wilton, the constant in all my patterns." "We held each other together," Wilton corrected. "That was the beauty of it, Katherine. We were always partners, always a team." "You made me better than I could have been alone, and I hope I did the same for you." "You did," Katherine assured him. "You gave me safety and love and a place to belong. You gave me a family and a home and the freedom to create. You gave me everything." They sat together as they had so many evenings before, watching the Arizona sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The land they had built their life on stretched before them, green from recent rains, dotted with cattle bearing the Kellerman brand. Smoke rose from the chimney of Will's house in the distance, and they could hear the faint sound of children playing near the barn. "It is a good life," Wilton said quietly. "The best life," Katherine agreed. "Better than anything I could have imagined or woven." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch, 2 people who had started as strangers on a dusty road and had woven together a tapestry of love, family, and enduring partnership. The threads of their lives had intertwined so completely that neither could imagine existing separately, and neither wanted to. They were part of each other, woven together as surely as Katherine's most intricate creation, a pattern that would endure long after they were gone, carried forward in the children and grandchildren who bore their legacy. The years of their 7th decade brought the mellowness of age. Wilton and Katherine moved more slowly now, took longer to rise in the mornings, needed more rest in the afternoons. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other only deepened as they faced the challenges of aging together. They helped each other, Wilton steady on his feet when Katherine's arthritis made her unsteady, Katherine patient with Wilton's hearing that had begun to fade. Ellen and Margaret, the twins, had both married now, Ellen to a rancher and Margaret to a teacher. They had both remained in the Willits area, unwilling to stray far from the family that meant so much to them. Sarah's weaving shop had become one of the most successful businesses in town, and she employed several of Katherine's other apprentices. James had proven himself a shrewd businessman, expanding the ranch's operations to include horse breeding alongside cattle. But it was Will who truly carried on his father's legacy. He ran the ranch with the same integrity and wisdom Wilton had shown, earning the respect of everyone who dealt with him. His children were growing up learning the same values Wilton had instilled, the same love of land and family and honest work. Watching Wilton felt profound satisfaction, knowing that everything he and Katherine had built would continue long after they were gone. One spring morning, when Wilton was 68 and Katherine 65, they woke to find the world covered in unexpected snow. Spring snowstorms were rare but not unheard of in Arizona, and this one had arrived without warning, blanketing the valley in white. After breakfast, despite Katherine's protests that they were too old for such foolishness, Wilton convinced her to walk out into the transformed landscape. They bundled in heavy coats and made their way slowly down to the creek, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. The world was quiet, muffled by the white covering, and they had it entirely to themselves. They stood by the creek, watching water still flowing beneath a skim of ice, and Wilton thought about all the times they had stood in this exact spot over the decades. Courting, married, with small children, watching grandchildren play. This land held the entire story of their life together. "Katherine," Wilton said, taking her hand, "if I had known, that day on the road, everything that would come from stopping to help, I would not have believed it. You were gathering scattered threads, and I thought I was just helping someone in trouble. But you were gathering the threads of our entire future, all the beauty and love and family that would come from that one moment." Katherine smiled, her face lined now but still beautiful to him. "You always understood it, even if you did not realize. You saw me weaving our future into my work because you were woven into every thread from that first day. I could not create anything without you being part of it, Wilton. You were always there, in every pattern, every image, every piece of beauty I made. You were the inspiration and the foundation for everything." They stood together in the snow, two people who had grown old together, who had built something lasting and true. The snow continued to fall softly around them, covering the land in white as clean and fresh as a newly woven cloth, ready for whatever patterns the future might bring. As Wilton approached 70, he knew with quiet certainty that his time was drawing shorter. His heart had begun to give him trouble, nothing dramatic, but enough that Doc Brennan's successor, a young physician named Dr. Cole, cautioned him to take things easy. Wilton followed the advice mostly to keep Katherine from worrying, but he felt no fear of what was coming. He had lived a full, rich life, had known profound love, had built something worthwhile. When his time came, he would face it with gratitude for all he had been given. Katherine seemed to sense his thoughts without him speaking them. She stayed close, taking every opportunity to sit with him, to talk and remember, to weave new memories, even as the time for making them grew short. She wove one final piece, working on it in secret in the early morning hours before Wilton woke. It was smaller than many of her works, but perhaps the most powerful, showing simply two pairs of hands clasped together, young and smooth in one corner, aged and weathered in the other, connected by a thread of gold that ran between them. On a warm evening in late June, surrounded by family who had gathered for what everyone knew without speaking was likely his last birthday, Wilton sat on the porch he had built so many decades ago and looked at the faces of his children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren who had recently arrived. Katherine sat beside him, her hand in his as it had been for 50 years. "I want you all to remember," Wilton said, his voice weaker than it once was but still carrying conviction, "that everything good in this life came from love and honest work. Your grandmother and I, we started with almost nothing but each other. We built all of this, the ranch, the family, the legacy, by showing up every day and doing our best, by loving each other through good times and hard times, by believing in something bigger than ourselves." He paused, looking at Katherine, seeing in her face all the years they had shared. "The day I met your grandmother, I thought I was just helping someone in trouble. I did not know I was finding my entire future. But that is how life works sometimes. You do the right thing, you show up when you are needed, you love with your whole heart, and somehow, by grace, you get back more than you ever dreamed possible." Katherine's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled at him, that same beautiful smile that had captured his heart half a century ago. Around them, their family stood in respectful silence, understanding they were witnessing something important, a final lesson from a man who had taught them so much. "Thank you," Wilton said, looking at each face in turn. "Thank you for being the blessing I never knew to ask for. Thank you for making an old cowboy's life more rich than he ever deserved." Will stepped forward, his own eyes wet. "Dad, you taught us everything that matters. How to work, how to love, how to live with integrity. Everything we are, we owe to you and Mom." Wilton felt a wave of peace wash over him. This was enough. This was everything. He had lived well, loved deeply, built something that would endure. As the celebration continued around him and Katherine held his hand, Wilton felt profoundly grateful for every moment, every thread that had been woven into the tapestry of his life. Wilton lived another year, gradually weakening but never losing his clarity of mind or his deep contentment with his life. Katherine rarely left his side, determined to savor every remaining moment. They talked for hours, revisiting memories, telling old stories, sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence that required no words. On a golden afternoon in September, with the whole family gathered at the ranch for the harvest celebration, Wilton died peacefully in his sleep, Katherine lying beside him, her hand clasped in his. He slipped away so quietly that Katherine did not realize at first, then felt the change in his breathing and knew. She lay there for a long moment, holding him, feeling the weight of loss begin to settle even as she felt gratitude for every year, every day, every moment they had shared. "Thank you," she whispered, kissing his forehead one final time. "Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life. I will carry you with me until we meet again." The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the territory. Wilton had touched many lives, earned respect and affection from countless people over his 7 decades. He was buried in the Willits Cemetery under a headstone Katherine had designed, simple but elegant, reading, "Wilton Warren Kellerman, 1855–1925. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. He built a legacy of love. Katherine lived another 5 years after Wilton's passing, years made bearable by her family who surrounded her with love and care. She continued to weave, though her hands shook now, and the work came slowly. Her final piece, completed just weeks before her own death, showed a cowboy and a woman on a porch, looking out at a sunset, their hands clasped together. It was titled simply Home, and it hung in the ranch house main room where all the family could see it. She died in her sleep in the spring of 1930 at the age of 72, in the house Wilton had built for her so many years ago. Her children found her in the morning, peaceful and still, her face serene. On her lap was a partially completed weaving showing a pattern of threads coming together, separate strands joining to create something beautiful and whole. Katherine was buried beside Wilton, and her headstone matched his. Katherine Mary Osborne Kellerman, 1858–1930. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she wove beauty into the world. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Will's children and grandchildren continued to work the land, upholding the values Wilton and Katherine had instilled. Sarah's daughter became a master weaver herself, keeping alive the techniques Katherine had developed. The family grew and spread, but they always remembered where they came from, the love story that had started it all. In the ranch house, in the place of honor, hung Katherine's tapestries telling the story of her life with Wilton. The one showing their first meeting on the dusty road, the one depicting their wedding, the massive family portrait, the final piece showing them together on the porch. Visitors would stop and marvel at the artistry, at the depth and realism Katherine had achieved. But the family who lived there saw something more. They saw love made visible, devotion rendered in thread and color, a testament to what two people could build when they found each other and chose to weave their lives together. The story of Katherine and Wilton became legend in Willits, passed down through generations. People spoke of the cowboy who had stopped to help a woman in trouble and found his destiny. They spoke of the weaver who could see futures in her threads and had woven a love story for the ages. Children grew up hearing about them, learning from their example of love, commitment, and partnership. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, people walking past the old Kellerman ranch house swore they could see two figures on the porch, an old couple sitting close together, hands clasped, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in brilliant colors. Just the play of light and shadow, surely. But then again, some love stories are too powerful to be contained by something as simple as death. Some patterns, once woven, endure forever. The legacy they left was not measured in acres or cattle or even in beautiful weavings, though all of those things endured. Their true legacy was the love they had shared and passed on, the values they had lived and taught, the family they had built and nurtured. Generation after generation of Kellermans grew up knowing that their family story began with two young people who met by chance on a dusty Arizona road and chose to build something beautiful together. In the weaving shop that Sarah had opened, now run by her granddaughter, samples of Katherine's work were carefully preserved and displayed. Visitors came from all over to see the pieces created by the woman who had revolutionized weaving techniques, whose artistry had never been matched. But for those who knew the story, the true masterpiece was not any single tapestry, no matter how beautiful or technically accomplished. The true masterpiece was the life Katherine and Wilton had woven together, thread by thread, choice by choice, moment by moment. A pattern of love and commitment, of partnership and family, of hard work and honest living. A tapestry that encompassed joy and sorrow, challenge and triumph, the everyday and the extraordinary, a creation that endured long after its creators were gone, inspiring everyone who learned their story to believe in the transformative power of love. And in the end, that was exactly what Katherine had always said she saw in the threads when she wove. Not just images or patterns, but possibilities. The possibility of love conquering loneliness. The possibility of two people building something greater than themselves. The possibility of a chance meeting on a dusty road changing the course of two lives forever. The possibility of creating something so beautiful and true that it would echo through generations. A testament to what humans can achieve when they find their perfect match and commit to weaving their lives together with love, honor, and devotion. That was the story of Katherine and Wilton Kellerman, the weaver's apprentice who created beauty, and the cowboy who saw his future woven into her threads. It was a story that began with scattered threads on a dusty road and ended only when those threads were finally woven into something complete, something perfect, something eternal. And even then, it did not truly end because the pattern they created continued on, passed down through children and grandchildren and beyond. A legacy of love that would never fade as long as there were Kellermans to remember, and to tell the tale of how it all began on that hot Arizona afternoon in 1878, when a cowboy named Wilton stopped to help a woman in trouble and found his entire future waiting for him in her sage green eyes.